Okay, hello. And this is, I believe it's week 3. Okay, this week, in Introduction to Games Development, we're going to be looking at computer games terminology. I hope you're all safe and well and are enjoying the module so far. And if you're working on the lab stuff, you should really be doing the sort of second half of the 1945 lab by now, or just about to start it. So if you're having difficulty with that, do remember that there are example implementations in the resources file for you to look at, and you can compare what you've sort of done with what they've done, or over Mars, the people that kind of came up with the tutorials have done. So do bear in mind that you can check that. I'll also try and put up a sort of formalised assessment either today or this week at some point, so that you can actually sort of make the informed choice of option 1 and option 2 and see what you're sort of working towards. Now, I have the lovely Anne Bison here, and we're looking at computer games terminology. We'll also have a quick look at animation terminology as well. Not a quick look, but anyway, there's a sort of glossary, several glossaries at the end for you to look at, just so you can familiarise yourself. Now, it's probably quite important when you're starting off a career as a computer game developer or computer games technologist or an animator or whatever you're wanting to do, to have a sort of lexicon. I had a sort of tutor, mentor that always said to me, you know, what you must do is have a lexicon, which is your own personal dictionary for terminology. And that's absolutely fine. So what I always sort of do, in my lexicon, dictionary, whenever I encounter a term that I don't actually know, I write it down, and it's there for me forever. Yes? Even incredibly complex terms like pneumono-ultramicroscopic silico-volcaniconiosis, just write it all down and write out the definition, and it'll be with you forever. Okay, so that's the point. So the entire thing is you're trying not to look like a bit of an idiot, okay, when you start to use terminology. So computer games terminology is, of course, in that particular field. So you're trying to get into the sort of epistemic frames, the pedagogical praxis, the lingo of your particular field. Okay? So justification for familiarization of computer games terminology. So the justification for that is that you're about to enter into a field. Every particular field that you sort of go into has its own sort of terminology and lingo that makes sense to everyone within that particular profession. Animation is no different. So for the animation students, you know, animation, rendering, modeling, exporting, you all sort of know what you're all on about. Okay, so we'll look at the term game. We'll also look at the term fun. Now, probably we're going into a wee bit too much detail here, but it is interesting. If you actually think about what a game is, there are many definitions of what a game is. And because you're starting to be sort of slightly academic, you're at university now, you don't necessarily have to agree with academic definitions of a game. And academics are incredibly definitional. They always look into particular words and they try to really define that particular word to death. So it all depends on what the definition of the word is. So games or game has a number of definitions associated with it over the decades. And then, of course, that's compounded and complicated by the fact that you sort of prefix things onto the computer game, video game, simulation game. The term fun as well, do sort of look into that. It's a very sort of interesting concept. Fun is a very sort of subjective term. What's fun to one particular person will not be fun to another, which is why we have serial killers. And things like that. So look into the term fun, and you'll find that it's very complex, and that's what academics sort of do. So it's very easy to say a game should be fun, but an academic will come along and say, but what is a game? What is fun? And these are terms that are certainly worth a little bit of your focus. We'll look at genres of games. technical terms used in the computer games industry, so some terminology, but nothing too particularly complex. And it's all quite interesting stuff. Okay, justification for the familiarization of computer games terminology. Schaefer, 2004A, never mind the A, proposes a theory of pedagogical practice which links learning and doing within an extended framework of communities of practice. So pedagogical practice and communities of practice. Lev and Wenger, 1991, were very sort of big in these concepts. So communities of practice, a bunch of people working towards a common goal, I suppose, is really the sort of root of it. Now, why should you actually know this? What is your particular community? Well, look at these. You have all of these game companies that are currently functioning, or perhaps some of them are gone now, but you have Nintendo, Atari, Capcom, Sega, Bullfrog, Konami, to name but a few. Blizzard Entertainment as well, Rockstar, and of course this is going to be ideally your community. And for the animation students, Axis Animation, so things like that. Okay, right. So there is a big wide community out there, lots and lots of companies using all the same terminology, and this is the terminology that you need to be familiarized with and be able to basically speak it. It's like speaking another language, and you need to sort of get into that. Blazing Griffin as well. Oh, Axis Animation, good, I'm glad I have that, which is quite clearly the V. If anyone remembers that particular series, the series, upside down and inverted, so it looks as if it's stolen to me. That particular company as well, whatever that is, and Handprint Games. So these are companies that are on your doorstep in Glasgow. I really must try and remember what that one is. Although, if I were in a live classroom situation, someone would probably know this already, but I forget. Rivet Games as well, these are all in Glasgow. Okay, so the games industry has many job roles, and so does the animations industry. So we have lead programmer, lead designer, games designer, script writer, map builder, level editor, graphical designer, illustrator, graphical user interface designer, object planner. And in order to sort of get into one of those particular job roles, you need to understand the terminology. And of course, when any of these new terms come up, this is the habit that I'm trying to get you into. When some of these new terms pop up and you think, I've never heard that word before in my life, then I'm going to write it down. Yes? There are many words. I'll give you an example of an incredibly long one. Every time I hear a long word, I write it down and I put a definition associated with it. Frossinosinnahilipilification is one of my favourite words. Anthropomorphization, one of my favourite words. I just put it in the lexicon that I have and it makes it look as if I've swallowed a thesaurus at some point. Okay, so pedagogical practice, based on the concept that different professions, so we have lawyers, doctors, and software engineers, games developers, and animators have different epistemologies, so epistemic frames, different particular ways in which they speak, I suppose. So you get Judge Judy here. She'll say things like, judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $5,000. So, judgment, plaintiff, $5,000. Yeah. So they use particular legal terminology. Okay, then we have Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Really enjoyed the sort of Hannibal series, and they say stuff like, patient suffers from obsessional syndrome with potential homicidal tendencies, and his only release may be to purge the fixation. Or my own personal favourite, he was a schizo. When they're describing me, a doctor has once described me as a schizophrenic paranoid. Well, I didn't know it, but we knew he was thinking it, or something like that. So they have all these different sorts of pieces of terminology. And software engineers are exactly the same. So you have things like implementation, coding, games design document for games designers, technical design document, testing, maintenance, and that's all to do with the version control. That's all to do with the particular field that you're in, and you know exactly what's happening when you say we're in the design phase, we're not in the coding phase yet. You know, it's an agile, iterative, developmental methodology, that sort of thing. So essentially, you all kind of know that you're on the same page in that particular community of practice. Okay? There's really different ways of knowing, deciding what is worth knowing, different ways of adding to the collective body of knowledge and understanding that. So, I mean, if you do one of these sorts of word sort of identification things on Google that was quite popular, and you type in game, I can't quite remember what the hell they're called actually. You type in game, you get all these different terms that are interlinked to, is it a word puzzle? I can't remember. You get all these sort of different terms that are all interlinked to the term game. And these are all sort of worth knowing, okay? So the term game, let's have a look at that particular term and try to define it and see if you actually agree with some of these definitions. So Salin and Zimmerman, 2004, design a game as a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict, defined by rules, but results in a quantifiable outcome. Now that you're sort of fully fledged academics, you can decide yourself whether you in fact agree with this. Football seems to destroy every definition of a game, or it certainly destroys that definition, because you're saying a game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict. Does football feel artificial to some people? Not entirely sure that it does. It does result in some kind of quantifiable outcome. I was watching the Old Firm game just yesterday, and that was certainly quantifiable outcome, 2-0. Right, okay, and then Crawford, 1982, defines a game as a closed formal system that subjectively represents a subset of reality. So a lot of sort of terms flying about there. A closed formal system, meaning that you shouldn't have to go out with the rules of the game in order to get a resolution. Now, if you think of the rules of pool and you go online, you will see that the rules of pool is absolutely 100% vast. You know, it's huge. But you shouldn't need to look to any external sources in order to resolve any sort of conflict. You know, like playing up the table. If you play pool in the Students' Union, you ever get the chance to do that sort of thing again, people always try to bend the rules ever so slightly. If you play chess, there's a great big rule book. You shouldn't have to go outside the rule book in order to resolve any form of conflict. And you get people that always try to test your knowledge by bending these rules slightly. For example, they'll try to capture with a pawn by going forward. Not allowed. Subjectively represents a subset of reality. What about objectively represents an aspect of reality? So just sort of think about that possibility. This is one of my sort of favourite definitions of a game. Dempsey et al. Defines a computer game or a game as a set of activities involving one or more players, has goals, constraints, payoffs and consequences. A game is rule guided and artificial in some respects. Finally, a game involves some aspect of competition, even if that competition is with oneself. Now, I always think of the Simpsons episode where Principal Skinner gets caught under the magazines and he goes missing. And he says, I maintain my sanity by dribbling a nearby basketball. I made a game of it, seeing how many times I could bounce that ball in a day and then trying to break that record. And some people are only in competition with themselves. I, for example, am only ever in competition with myself when I'm sort of running half marathons or whatever, or playing the piano. That is sufficient for me. I'm attempting to better myself. But this is one of the few definitions that actually introduces the idea of competition associated with games. Jesper Juhl states a game is a rule-based system with a variable and quantifiable outcome, where different outcomes are assigned different values, and the player exerts effort in order to influence the outcome. The player feels emotionally attached to the outcome. Now that is in fact quite interesting, and the consequences of the activity are optional and negotiable. So this is one of the first definitions that actually has that emotional attachment, and you do get very, very emotional to emotionally associated to the outcome of a game. You get very, very angry, you get really downright pissed off if you don't win. Some people do. You've seen it all on the internet, where people start to lose a game and they smash up their computer. Normally spoiled children, I've noticed. But anyway, very emotionally charged. Okay, the problem with defining a game is compounded when you start to add prefixes, simulation, video, computer simulation. So all these terms exist in the academic literature, and they're worthwhile actually sort of looking at. So, I mean, when you're looking at games and simulations, what are the differences? And these things sort of intermingle to make simulation games, computer simulations games, then serious games, games-based learning. This is a diagram I've published time and time again. It's been in a number of my sort of publications. And I'm relatively proud of it because I did spend a good 6 months in my PhD looking at the definition of games and simulations and sort of piecing that all together and seeing where it all sort of fits in. Now, eventually you come to the realization that you can't possibly define what a game is. It's relatively variable because countless people, far brainier than myself, have tried and failed. I came to the epiphany one day, I can't actually come up with a universally recognized definition of a game myself. Also, fun. LeBlanc 2000 promotes the following taxonomy. I was quite proud of not nicking this taxonomy, but finding it, because it was republished, I think in 2004, and it was something to do, I think it was called the MDA framework, so Mechanics, Design and Aesthetics framework, and this was brought into it, and it actually replaced masochism with something a little bit more diplomatic. So we have sensation, the player experiences pleasure, fantasy experiences immersion, if in fact immersion is fantasy, narrative, assuming a role of a character in a story, challenges, they're trying to overcome these obstacles, fellowship, the opportunity to connect, cooperation, discovery, exploring, expression, the player has the ability to customize the game in some way and assert their particular individuality, and then this last one, masochism, meaning that the player can submit the character to violence, death, unacceptable social activity, and that DayZ, you can actually shoot someone in the penis. In Carmageddon, you can run over someone, and you can do all these sorts of things that you're not allowed to do in real life. And that's one of the sort of things that worries people in terms of violence in video games, because people are sort of doing this in video games, and then of course if they lose the sort of grip on reality, all of a sudden you may have a violent situation occurring. At least that's what people argue. So let's have a look at genres of games. Adventure games. Typically the story is based on a protagonist required to solve puzzles, to move the story along, and interacting with things. It can be text-based or graphical, first, second or third person. It can be all these sorts of things. Here's some examples. Mario games, Mario Kart, that sort of thing. More examples, we've got Sonic the Hedgehog, Turok Dinosaur Hunter, Assassin's Creed. So those are sort of adventure games. Now all of these particular definitions can become a bit blurred. So what exactly do you mean by an adventure game? So once again, it's all about defining exactly what you mean. Action games, emphasis on physical challenges, hand-eye coordination, reaction time. Has a number of diverse subgenres, beat-em-ups, fighting games, maze games, platform games, even rhythm action games now, and shooter games. And of course they're less cerebral than adventure games and require a faster reaction, so they're faster paced. Okay? And here's some examples. We've got Space Invaders, we've got Mortal Kombat, we've got Sonic again, you see how that sort of blurs. We've got Guitar Hero, and we've got Double Dragon, for a few examples. Then you get things like role-playing games, so there's a hero or a group of heroes in a quest There's an unfolding story. It's a huge immersive world. The character develops in strength and ability, sometimes dependent on your choices, moral choices within the game. Combat can be important. Micromanagement may also be a bit of a factor as well in those particular games. They're very, very complex games. So we have things like Fable, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, Zelda games, two Zelda games, and I don't know why I have a picture of Foghorn Leghorn in there. Oh yes, you can actually have pets in these games. They're that incredibly complicated. Boy, I say boy, you are testing the limits of my medication. But anyway, I've put that in there because when I first played Link's Awakening on the Game Boy many, many years ago, probably before some of you were born, they actually gave me, they give you a pet in the game, and it's a little sort of rooster that carries you across gaps and stuff like that. And that's absolutely brilliant. And then you get the fire rod, and then I called it Henry, and then the rooster is gone. You're like, oh, I wanted that rooster back. Strategy games, limited set of resources, and you've got to manage how these things are actually allocated, perhaps time, money, resources, trade-off, and you have to achieve a predetermined sort of goal. And they can be in real time, or they can be turn-based, and opponents can be generated or human. So here's some strategy games. You've got things like Command and Conquer. You've got Lord of the Rings. You've got StarCraft and sort of strategy games like that. Simulation games, you're trying to emulate the real world operating conditions perhaps. Simulations of cars, tanks, aircrafts. A great deal of detail can go into simulations. It really depends. Lots and lots of detail. Perhaps you get simulations that are a wee bit more abstract and cartoony. More detail results in flight simulators and racing games. And less detailed simulations are generally referred to as sort of arcade simulations as well. So simulation games. There's a whole different bunch of genres. So here's some examples of simulation games. The Formula One games, they are unbelievable on some consoles. Sometimes it takes you about 5, maybe 6 minutes to complete a lap. I remember this specifically because in 2013, 2012, I actually lived with someone who just played these things constantly, and I heard it all the way into the night. So very, very detailed. There's a sort of flight simulator, where of course I think in version 20 or something, version 2020 of the Microsoft Flight Simulator, the thing that sort of sparked off flight simulators and serious games in the 1980s. And then of course you have these sort of games for military purposes, when you have sort of battle simulations, and there's a rifle range there. I was actually in the army. I got a medal for shooting at one point. I was actually quite good at it. But I've actually used one of these sort of battle simulations. It was about £250,000, and of course you can do these sort of simulations without actually shooting someone or eradicating human life. Yes, so good. Simulation games. Very, very detailed, very, very precise. And the weapon that was actually used in the battle simulation that I used was the SA-80 assault rifle, which is the standard British Army issue. So very, very detailed, high fidelity graphics, high fidelity haptic feedback as well. Sports games, you're participating in some sort of sporting event or activity. Prowess in the real life sport is irrelevant and does not translate to the game, and it reproduces the rules. So there's a skateboardy one, there's football, and we all know the Nintendo Wii, and I would challenge any of you to that because I am undeniably camp, and I seem to be able to just kind of stand there and go, and all I really need to do is move about in my hypersonic way, and I'll probably beat you at Wii Tennis, no problem. I challenge any of you to that. Fighting games, a combination of attack and defend from attacks. Players have a basic set of attacks. Of course, they become more complex as time goes on. Nowadays, you put the controller down, you read 20 pages of fatalities in order to finish off your opponent. Games have become more complex since my time. And most fights only last a few minutes. and are generally viewed from the side. Okay, so you get things like Tekken, you get things like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat 11, I sort of spoke about last week. So fighting games, excellent stuff. One of my favourite genres actually. Racing games, there's a time constraint, and there's various different ways of putting caveats in these things. So you've got a time constraint, a battle mode. Mario Kart did it right, of course, because of Shigeru Miyamoto, that god. Attempting to beat other players, and there's obstacles and weapons. Mario Kart did it the best, I would say, in order to sort of caveat all of this, adding in the battle mode, the different objects in the game, and creating such a variety in terms of gameplay. MOBA, multiplayer online battle arena, so also known as action real-time strategy games, and a player controls a single character in a team who compete versus another team of players. So there's a few examples there. I don't think that Fortnite is a MOBA. Technically not one, apparently, I was reading. You've got others, casual games, god games, puzzle games, MMORPGs, stealth games, survival horror games. And successful game design requires a knowledge of the possibilities and the terminology. So when you see some incredibly successful games, and there's the Last of Us, Resident Evil, incredibly successful games, people were addicted to Candy Crush. And it's only a sort of, it's a very, very simple game. So, I mean, you should possibly consider what you're actually wanting to develop, and people are employed by companies to create these sort of two-dimensional games on mobile applications. The Sims, as if you're not happy enough with your real life, you can have a simulated one. And I never really got the point of The Sims. I tried playing it, I was in my parents' basement, and I kept on urinating myself, so I never really got the point of The Sims. But you can really simulate any form of life that you want for yourself. So, I must confess that these are an amalgamation of another lecturer's slides and terminology as well. So the games design document that we've sort of covered last week, a highly descriptive living design document created and edited by the development team, and the results of collaboration between designers, artists and programmers, and a guiding vision which is used throughout the game development process. So GDD, you'll hear an awful lot of acronyms in your life, and you've got to sort of slightly know what they all are. I was talking to someone on a dating app, because I'm trying my hand at dating, and it turns out that they are a teacher. And I said, oh really, you're a teacher in PE or SE? And then they came back and said, I'm far too fat to be a physical education teacher. And you go, no, I meant PE as in primary education and SE as in secondary education, because I am in HE, higher education. So you hear an awful lot of acronyms in life that are in fact very, very confusing. So in this particular epistemic frame or epistemology, games, GDD is games design document, okay? Then of course you have the technical design document, which we're not going to look at in this module, but it is important in later modules of your computer games development, and it's worth knowing that that means technical design document. A document created by the technical staff after analysing the GDD, and it really describes the technical aspects of everything. So technical staff, under the leadership of the technical director, what technologies to be used, middleware, environment, that sort of thing, and what asset files are required. What audio asset file formats are required, file naming conventions, planning for localization, version, operating version control system, staffing plan, challenges expected. So, I mean, you need to sort of slightly know that. AAA games, everyone knows this, but I challenge you to look at the glossaries that I'm going to provide for you in these links. Look at them, go through all of them, cover the definition and see if you actually know what they are. That's your challenge for this week. AAA, highest developmental budget, highest levels of promotion. To remain AAA game It must be successful. It must be entirely successful. And expected to be a bestseller and high quality as well. Okay, accessibility. Easy to learn, not easy, not necessarily easy to play. So, I mean, if you think of chess, the rules of chess are exceptionally easy, but it's an exceptionally complex game, and you get different sort of variations of it. You get blitz chess, which is only supposed to last about 5 minutes, and things like that. And people analyse chess to death. Okay, so AI, artificial intelligence, really a set of algorithms attempting to simulate intelligent human behaviour, and it's NPCs mostly. Okay. ARG, alternate reality game. The academic that wrote this has put augmented reality game, which isn't really entirely correct. So there can be two sort of definitions, but ARG in this, I was really thinking of alternate reality game when I wrote it. Alternate reality game is a sort of story, narrative, puzzle-based online thing. In an augmented reality game, that should be fairly obvious, where you're in fact augmenting reality with some form of technology or some form of overview on the screen. An intense player involvement in story, real world as a platform, takes place in real time, and story develops based on the player's action. In terms of augmented reality, there's been incredible advancements in augmented reality quite recently, I suppose, where you can actually see from a research perspective, you have these sort of posters where you can point your phone up to them, and you can actually see things like microbes and parasites and organs, human organs as well. So lots of advancement there. Asymmetry, starting positions are not identical, so perhaps in historical war simulations. Avatar represents the player in the game, and whatever particular avatar you would like. Sometimes it takes you ages to actually pick your avatar within a game. Now, is it an appropriate form of representation nowadays? That's something to perhaps be questioned. An electronic character or token, so if you remember Monopoly, I was always the dog or the top hat. So that represents your particular player. And it can take a long time to actually pick what your avatar is, and you can customize it. Took me 45 minutes to pick my avatar in Destiny. I took longer picking my avatar than I did actually playing the game. Beta game is in a play testing stage. You get the alpha, beta, different sort of testing stage. Blind testing, where the designer is not involved. A casual game, it's short, played to relax, kill time, less expensive to make. Challenge, the game is a series of challenges, overcomes challenges to win. Chaos, randomness, so have a look at all of these things. Complexity, is it true to life? Is it too complex? Good game designers remove unnecessary complexity. Now, I've probably said this to you before, but some of your previous, shall we say, submissions to this module, or your predecessors in the last cohort, would make games that were in fact too difficult for even them to complete, which was quite fun. Rookie mistake. Cooperative games, players work together to beat game, and beware of traitors. We all know that there's traitors in these games. Cutscenes, this can be video inserted into the game to advance the story. Story is now becoming more increasingly important in games. Genres, these are subcategories defined by the types of challenges. And there's a computer and video game genre sort of link there for you to have a look at. Graphics, visuals in the game, important to help sell it. It's always quite interesting if you were ever sitting in a cinema and it would say, this is not real game footage. And it would be trying to sort of sell you a game or advertise a game. Does good graphics equate to a good game? Doesn't. It doesn't really. Games can be incredibly immersive and have terrible graphics or limited graphics. It doesn't sort of work that way. Immersion isn't, or engagement is not as a result of good graphics generally. Although it can be. Okay. HUD, heads-up display, health, lives, times, weapons, and that sort of thing. Immersion, the feeling of being in the game, increasingly big issue in games as well. To feel immersion or sometimes the sort of flow is a difficult balance to actually get. And you do realise once you've sort of become immersed in something, because the passage of time seems irrelevant to you, it's all very sort of relative. Kingmaker, player who can no longer win, able to influence who does win, apparently. Level, distinct stage or episode, completion of all levels means completion of the overall mission. Mechanic, game rules, roll 2 dice, move token. We'll have a lecture on game mechanics. Game mechanics is quite a difficult sort of field within games, so we will look at that in depth. Massively multiplayer online games. Player takes the character in defined setting. Thousands of players can go for months or years. Multi-user dungeon, original form of MMO, and perhaps a bit dated now. We were doing a literature review several years ago, and what multi-user dungeon, or MUD, was in fact one of the pieces of search criteria. And because we actually added that in, we started getting articles back on Glastonbury. Novice, newbie, noob, new player with no experience is why I don't play online games, because I'd be a noob. Perfect information, all information known to all players. So chess, all pieces capabilities known. Imperfect information, yeah. Poker, cards, hidden. I've only played poker once, and I managed to win 14 quid. Farming, repetitive playing, small episode in an MMO to gain loot rewards. We've sort of done that in sort of platform games as well, where you have to sort of gather up your life. It's very, very popular sort of thing in Zelda games. You get all your power-ups before you attack the sort of main bad guy at the end. You can't sell for real money to other players. Is that against the spirit of the game? Who knows? Play balance, is balance fair? Each player has an equal chance of winning, even if starting positions are perhaps unequal. Playtest, you're playtesting a prototype of the game, identifying bugs, improving the mechanics. A pitch is not a football pitch, an oral presentation describing the game. I'm asking you to sort of do, perhaps, if you want, a little pitch of your game, a sort of overall statement of your game, summary at the beginning of your game's design document. Power-ups, in-game item or object, collection, confers, collection confers temp increase or attainment of capability. Okay, fine, fair enough. Prototype, an unfinished version of a game. So that's a very, very sort of big term in the computer games development program. People are always coming up with a prototype, or in software engineering, there's always going to be a sort of prototype of some description. Real time, continuous play, no turn taking or pauses. Replayability, can we play the game again, beat the game? Rules, once again, that kind of relates to mechanics, enforced by the software as well, but they can be broken. It's a bit like the Matrix. Sandbox, players are free to do what they want. They don't necessarily need to follow a linear story. And of course, they require powerful computers to do. Spawn, you initially reappear, your initial appearance, and then you respawn after you've been sort of killed off. Studio, group of people working together to create a game. Various skills and experiences are required. Turn-based, mostly board game. Players wait for their turn, fair enough. Turtling, apparently, I don't even know this. 3 or more players, one player lies low, often player exhausts themselves, other players exhaust themselves, and it's known as camping in shooter games. Amazing, I didn't even know that. User interface, how the players interact with the game. It's very important and it's difficult to get right. And the players must be able to see what's happening and how to do something as well. So the point is, there are a lot of general and specific games industry and discipline-specific terms that all of you need to familiarise yourself with in order to be credible in your field and as a human in general. And if you don't know them, you will in fact be caught out at some stage. I remember at one point in my PhD, I had written down the term anchored learning, and I hadn't properly researched what anchored learning actually was. And then someone asked me, what's anchored learning? And you go, I don't know, something with an anchor and a ship. Take your suicide pill. Because I didn't actually know what it was. So that's my admission to you today. So here's a few glossaries. Do look at all of these. There's one for animation as well. And you can look at all of these, and some of them are relatively detailed. And if you should be able to access the links and go through them and make sure that you sort of know everything. Or if you don't, it might be surprising. So today and for the rest of the week, complete the 1945, then decide on the next sort of tutorial that you're going to do, or the next lab that you're going to do, and start to put down some ideas about your game as well. Now that applies to everyone. So if you're even just designing a game and not really implementing one, like if you're doing option 1, then you still have to think about a particular game that you're going to design. Doesn't necessarily have to be original, but it has to be more or less your own work. Okay, so I will try to put up a sort of formalised assessment so that you know more about what you're doing, and also do complete the 1945. Look at the solutions that are already provided as well, and next week we're going to look at what makes a good game. So, okay, right. Anybody's got any problems, then email me. I realise some people have emailed me already, and I'm trying to get around to everyone's emails, but it has been nuts, because that has been the only way that people have of contacting me at the minute. If I haven't got round to emailing you back, I apologise, but as I say, it's been crazy. So, have a good week. Catch you later.